and we will have a look then. So we've covered so far, I suppose, the sourcing of news, the basics of scripting, and now we're going to look at how you put it all together in your actual news bulletin, because that is kind of one of the most common forms that your news is going to be taking, a top of our bulletin or a headline style bulletin. So I will come to Connor, and Connor, I might ask you, what are some of the things you think you would be considering when you were putting your bulletin together?
I guess what's the biggest story? Like, what's the biggest, probably national governmental story? And that goes kind of at the top. And then maybe try and get, like, if you're on a local station, a bit more local, like at number two or three or whatever, so that it's getting more specialized the further in you go.
Absolutely. So, yes, you're trying to think of what is your lead story of the day. So, you're thinking about, again, to try and work out what that is. What is the most important story of the day? And usually that is going to be your lead. Now, you get blessed with days like the last couple that we've had, where, for example, on Monday, it was very clear that a lead on the lot of the day was going to be that Jim Gavin had pulled out of the presidential race, because it was unexpected and I think unprecedented. And then obviously yesterday we had the budget. But there are days where the lead is not quite so clear. And in that case, that's where your editorial judgment comes in. So again, like Connor said, when talking maybe about a local station, you might actually go with something local over a national angle if it's something that is very important to the people in your particular area. So, for example, I'm guessing for maybe a station like Shannonside or Midwest, where a lot of people were without power over the weekend and were left without power after Storm Amy for longer than the rest of the country, that was a big part of their bulletins. But for a Dublin station, that wasn't going to be a consideration. So again, just having that example there. With your editorial judgment, if your news editor is coming after you and, giving out to you about something, always be ready to justify your choice. I go back to when we were talking about the hook earlier. Well, why? Why did you go with that lead? And if you are able to justify it, well, okay, I can't promise that your news editor won't give out to you or have an issue with it, but at least you'll have a reason. You weren't just kind of throwing it in there without thinking. And a very silly and light-hearted example I gave about iRadio News, and I don't want you to judge us too much for this. Last year, I think it was, when Molly May and Tommy Fury announced that they were breaking up. That came in, I want to say it was about 4:15. We do a headline bulletin at 4:30. And I was like, do you know what? I'm actually going to put that in. Now, I was a little bit tongue in cheek about it, but it was breaking news. We are an entertainment and youth and music focused station, and quite a core part of our demographic is women in their early 20s. And they were obsessed with this story. It was unexpected. It had just come out. So for the headlines, we went in straight in and said, okay, this is just after happening. If we go back to an older example, it was a case where when Zayn Malik quit One Direction, that was a lead for us. And then obviously more recently, and I know a lot of stations were leading with this because it was a death as well, but certainly, when Liam Payne passed away, that was something that was a big story because we play these artists, our listeners relate to them. So I'm really talking about justifying your choice. And if you can do that and you've really thought about it and put some thought into it, it'll hopefully help you to avoid some trouble and make you think of it. I've just included a little screen recording because I'm not sure if any of you have got to see what Burley looks like. Now, with the caveat, so Burley is the news reading system that a lot of independent radio stations use, not all of them. And again, not the RTE stations, but a lot of stations use it. Every station would have their own kind of templates laid out, but I'm just going to play a little screen. There's no sound on this. It's literally just a screen recording of what it looks like when you're reading through a bulletin on air. So we can see that we have a lot of copy here. Here we're coming into a clip. We can see it's 18 seconds. The reader would press that on air. So we have a lot of stories actually in this bulletin. Then we're coming into our sport. Again, this is just an iRadio style. Your different stories in sport, you're reading through them. And then your weather as well. So there is a traffic section. I would just be taking that from kind of Google Maps and a different document. But that is kind of what it looks like when you're reading a bulletin on air with Burley. It's very straightforward. You're just using your mouse to control it, hitting the clips when you need to. And it's all kind of laid out nicely for you. Again, there will be times where you have to print out your stories, or maybe that's what's done in your station. But Burley is a very handy way of working it. Couple of other things we have to think about then. The minutage requirements. So that basically means how many minutes of news you have to put out each day. So you'll have certain minutage requirements between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. That's where a lot of your news will go. And then between 7 p.m. and 7 a.m. the following morning as well. So with your news editor, it'll be laid out in kind of your license. For example, in iRadio, every bulletin template that we have, it tells you at the top how long it's meant to be. And what's very handy about Burley is it has a timing feature on it. So that gives you an idea of how long a certain story is. And the more used you get to using Burley, the more you'll realise, okay, maybe 3 sentences is about 20 seconds or something like that. But on that, your reading pace, like, are you fast or slow as a reader? Again, if you go into news reading, you'll develop your style as you continue to go on, and you might know, okay, I find I'm usually a little bit quicker than Burley's telling me I'm going to be, or a little bit slower. So you'll learn to figure that out. Then we're talking about what stories will have audio. So again, to go back to the formats that we were talking about, are you going to run copy for a certain story? Have you a clip to add into it, a voicer or a package? What audio are you going to bring into it? Because that is going to add to the time that you have as well. And then very importantly, as has already been referenced in terms of the station style, that does refer to the scripting style that you've put in, but also the actual structure of the bulletin. So again, for example, with iRadio, we do a little headline tease at the start. We're teasing 2 stories that are coming up later in the bulletin. Then we say, we introduce ourselves. So it's, I'm Fionnuala, here's what's happening. That's our little tag. And then we're going first. So we're letting people know, okay, these stories are going to come later in the bulletin, but first we've got your lead. Sometimes the presenter will introduce the reader. Sometimes the reader will introduce or outro themselves, and something like a kicker. So a kicker is the quirky story that you have at the end of your bulletin. Could be showbiz, could be entertainment, could be a ridiculous survey. And if any of you are fans of David O'Doherty, the comedian, I love him, but I was very hurt when he sagged. So showbiz news, and gave the example of a story about Christina Aguilera's cat having alopecia, which I was like, don't minimise showbiz news like that. But it is those kind of stories that we like to run in iRadio that tell you, okay, we've come to the end of the hard news now. You're getting a little bit of light relief at the end of it, okay? So now we're going to listen to 2 examples, and I've picked 2 different ones from Irish radio. We're going with News Talk first, then with Spin. They're both from a 1 p.m. bulletin, and they're both from the 26th of September. So what I'd like you to do, and I'll be kind of coming around to ask you your different thoughts on this after, listen to the bulletin as a whole. Listen to how it's introduced. Listen to what formats of stories are used, what stories are covered, what you notice if there are any similarities or what's different. Just really have a think about it while you're listening. So we'll go with News Talk first.
This is News Talk.
Still to come, we're talking about supports for people living with an eating disorder. Plenty of you still getting in touch about the NFL and should it really be taking place here in Dublin. And we're going to find out about the world's coolest neighbourhood, one of which is actually located in our capital city. First though, here's Barry White with the news.
On 106 to 108 FM, on the News Talk app, powered by Go Loud and Smart Speaker. This is News Talk, your IMRO National Station of the Year.
It's 1 o'clock. Good afternoon. The terrorism case against kneecap rapper Liam O'Gohany has been thrown out following a technical error in the way the charge against him was brought. The 27-year-old, who performs under the stage name Mo Cara, was accused of displaying a flag in support of Hezbollah at a gig in the O2 Forum in Kentish Town, North London, in November last year. Mo Cara spoke outside court after the judgment was made today.
This entire process was never about me, never about terrorism. It was always about Gaza, about what happens if you dare to speak up. As people from Ireland, we know oppression, colonialism, famine and genocide. We have suffered and still suffer under your empire. Your attempts to silence us have failed because we're right and you're wrong.
The Finance Minister says there is a degree of certainty that European pharmaceutical exports won't be hit with new tariffs. It follows an announcement by Donald Trump of a 100% levy on branded pharmaceutical products that don't have a manufacturing base within the US. Pascal Donoghue says it underscores why the EU-US trade agreement last month was so important. He says government are working on the assumption that EU pharma imports to the US will face a 15% tariff.
Due to the hard work of many governments and the work of the Commission, at least there is a degree of certainty regarding where we now stand. It is having an effect, of course, on the life science and pharmaceutical sector, but we are working with that sector to look at how we can continue to support the work they have here in Ireland and how they can play an important role.
Finally, both teams involved in this weekend's NFL match at Croke Park have arrived in Ireland. The Pittsburgh Steelers landed this morning on board a chartered Aer Lingus flight. Meanwhile, Minnesota Vikings players touched down with Delta Airlines. General Manager of NFL UK in Ireland, Henry Hodgson, has been speaking about the influence of the GAA on the game.
Some of the guys that are playing in the NFL now from Ireland are saying that it was their experience, obviously playing Gaelic football, I think, predominantly, that got them into the kicking and develop the technique that they needed.
That's it for now. More at 2.
Okay, so that's our News Talk News Bulletin. I did include the sport, but I don't think we need to listen to all of that. We'll just compare it now to the Spin Bulletin. So again, bearing in mind these are from the same day and the same time, both 1 o'clock.
Here's what you need to know now.
I'm Katie. Here's what's happening. Former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair is reported to be involved in discussions about leading a post-war transitional authority in Gaza. The proposal is said to have backing from the White House. The news comes as medical aid for Palestinians. Asil Badoun says conditions are worsening.
It has 14 newborn babies in incubators, and the director of the hospital say they only have less than 24 hours of fuel, and that means that if the fuel is out, those babies will face the risk of dying.
Terrorism charge brought against Kneecaps Makara in the UK has been dropped. The rapper, whose real name is Lamo Guhani, appeared before Woolwich Crown Court this morning. Makara spoke outside court after the judgment was made.
This entire process was never about me, never about terrorism. It was always about Gaza, about what happens if you dare to speak up. As people from Ireland, we know oppression, colonialism, famine and genocide.
Both teams involved in this weekend's NFL match at Croke Park have arrived in Ireland. The Pittsburgh Steelers landed this morning on board a chartered Aer Lingus flight, while Minnesota Vikings players touched down with Delta Airlines. And switching to the cosy wardrobe and the sound of crunchy leaves are among people's favourite autumn comforts. Getting to wear warm jumpers and fleeces was named as the best thing about the seasons changing, according to a survey carried out by Costa Coffee.
Okay, so they are our 2 bulletins. And Fiona, I might come to you. What are your thoughts on what you've just heard there in terms of maybe the differences or how you would compare the 2 bulletins?
I think we kind of spin, especially towards the end. They have like a bulletin that's like not really anything breaking news, but like something to do like seasons or that, or something that like people will get at a glance. That's not like obviously serious news, but like something that'd be interesting. Whereas News Talk, it was kind of just very kind of Irish centric stories that were very kind of very important, of like things that are going on like very currently at this current moment. Like they both shared like the NFL and obviously like the kneecap story, but even with Spin, they put down the clip of kneecap almost to put in like 4 stories to kind of have the same kind of runtime.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah, that was one thing to note. They did just chop that Makara clip slightly. There was definitely more, I think, in the News Talk bulletin. So yeah, they chopped it down to make it more suitable again for that kind of faster paced bulletin. Cathal, what are your thoughts on what you heard there? Anything you picked up on?
So yeah, I agree with Fiona there. What she just said. The music is kind of beatier and faster to give him maybe more young youth sort of vibe, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah. So that is what we call a music bed. What is it? Because your vocals lie on it is the term on it. So that is a music bed, and absolutely Spin and ourselves as well would make use of that. News Talk, I think, do have one, but it's a lot lower. It's not as obvious in the bulletin. So absolutely, that's kind of, I suppose, to get the listener thinking, okay, this is fast paced, it's still upbeat, we're flying through it. Yeah. Anything else, Cathal?
I'm trying to think. It seems to be just a lot more kind of bam, bam, bam. That's
exactly, flying through it. Yeah, on the Spin one. Yeah, absolutely. And then Megan, just come to you for your thoughts as well.
I noticed with the Spin one that they had a different kind of bulletin. So they started off with the Tony Blair and Gaza instead of the Makara one. I think that was. I also agree with what Fiona and Cathal have said as well with the music and the different type of bulletins being used, but that was the difference that I picked out, was a different news story at the beginning of the bulletin.
Absolutely, yeah. They went with a different lead, and that did surprise me a bit because I thought, particularly as a music station and a youth station, that the Mochara story would have led there. But yeah, they did go with a Gaza-related story first. So even just all the things around the bulletin as well. You had the presenter, Andrea Gilligan, who was on air at Newstalk at the time. She introed Barry, so he did an intro himself. So that's just a little kind of a style thing. Again, longer clips used. Newstalk went for 3 copy and clips, which is interesting. There's not much variation there then. It was literally 3 copy and clip stories. And it took them 2 minutes and 55 to get those 3 copy and clips out. Spin, it had what's called an imaged intro. So imaging is basically everything that's not the ads and everything that's not the music. So when that station voice of Spin was coming in saying, here's what you need to know now, that's imaging. So it wasn't a live intro into the presenter. You had the news, or into the newsreader, I should say. The newsreader then introed themselves. And Spin managed to get 4 stories in a minute and 18. So they had copy and clip on 2 of them, as was pointed out already. Mochara's clip was just shortened slightly compared to the Newstalk one. They had the same copy on the NFL story as Newstalk did, because again, that would have been filed to the network, but they didn't go with a clip on it from that Henry Hutchins guy, and they threw in another kicker, the cosy autumnal comforts as well. So again, that style of finishing on a light note. So we just hear, I suppose, how there was more content got in, but how it was tailored as well for the audience. So then when we come to reading your bulletin, and we'll try and fly through this now, the reading and interviewing, just the basics. So what you heard there as well were 2 very different styles. If I think Barry White's style of read in general is a little bit slower paced, he's very measured. Katie was absolutely bombing through it. She was like, okay, we're getting this done. We're getting our minute and 18 of news out. I wouldn't be surprised if she was even trying to stick to just a minute of news, but it was slow. So what I would say are the main tips that I would give from years of news reading. Reading aloud is really crucial. You can read something in your head a million times, but it's only when you go to say it out loud that you realise, actually, I don't know how to pronounce that word, or that just doesn't sound right. So just bear that in mind. Mutter away to yourself, but just say it out loud. You don't have to do a full scale projection performance thrown into the back of the office, but do try and say it out loud. This helps you then to know where you're going to take a breath or need to pause, because you're going to catch yourself out if you're reading something for the first time and the sentence is maybe a little bit too long if you scripted it yourself, or it was written by another reader who just has or reporter who has a different style of read to you. That might catch you out. Just a little hyphen or a little break in the script will tell you where you're going to pause. Sounding confident then and authoritative, a really hard thing to do when you're coming into the studio for the first time and you're not confident because you're scared of thinking everyone of listening to you on air. But you just need to really try and project your voice, kind of be like imagine you're at the top of the room and you're trying to kind of throw it to someone who's down at the back of the room, really up, chest out. A lot of times you'll be sitting, but if you actually, it might help to even stand for your first few bulletins, where you can really just try and project your voice that bit more. Most important thing when you're live, especially, keeping going. Even if you make a mistake, if you say something wrong, you can try once to correct yourself if you think you're going to get it at that time, but otherwise just keep going. Half the time people don't notice, and also if you say something confidently enough, you can kind of get away with it. Changing words and phrases to suit your style of read. There are certain words or terms that might trip you up, and if you just make sure that they are changed to suit how you would say something, then you're going to help yourself a lot. Again, coming back to this is something that we've already covered in scripting. Keeping it short and simple, clear as possible, and don't have really long sentences that you have to take a kind of a couple of breaths in, just have them going straight through. Picking out the words or phrases in the sentences that are important. So the example I always give here, if Gardaí have seized a certain amount of drugs, it's the monetary value that's important here. So you're going to emphasise €100,000 rather than Gardaí have seized, or Gardaí have seized €100,000 worth of cannabis. Do you hear how you need to give the emphasis to the actual point of the story? Or like you had earlier with your script, a woman has died. The emphasis is on died there, and you're probably going to put a bit of emphasis on County Roscommon as well, so that people know what has happened and where it's happened. And you really can't go wrong with listening back to yourself, because it's really only then you're going to pick out what you need to change. Obviously, when you're recording, you hear yourself on your headphones, but you have so many other things going around your mind, namely trying to get through the bulletin or trying to get through it as you know, you're trying to just get it over and done with. Listening back to yourself is really crucial and will help you improve no end. If you do end up in radio presenting, it's going to happen anyway because your boss is going to want to do what are called air checks with you. So you might as well get into the habit of listening to yourself before your boss is picking everything apart that you've said. Things to bear in mind then, coming back to being authoritative, like listeners need to trust what you're talking about. And also, it is really uncomfortable listening to someone who just sounds really nervous. And look, nerves are absolutely understandable, but that's where a little bit of faking it comes in. Just having that force in your voice, because you don't want listeners there thinking, oh God, will they ever just get to the end of the bulletin and get through it? It's not an enjoyable listening experience for the listener, and it's certainly not enjoyable for you. And at the end of the day, the newsreaders who are solid and good and have their experience, they don't sound unsure of themselves. They're certainly not going up at the end of sentences kind of questioning, what was that information I gave? No, they have a tone the whole way through. Also, I would, because I think a lot of readers starting off fall into this, try not to be sing-songy. A lot of readers will start each sentence in the same tone and then repeat it for each sentence in the story. And that's where listening back to yourself, you'll train yourself out of that because you'll hear how repetitive you're being. So bear that in mind. And the final section then is just on interviewing, and I'm basing a lot of the tips that I'm giving here are based on doing kind of studio based interviews. A lot of them, like a lot of the interviews I do as well, are pre-recorded. Now a lot of the basics still apply when it is a live interview. Obviously you've got extra kind of considerations to take into then, but the mindset that you have going into an interview is very important. Don't get too worked up about it, even if it is a high profile person. At the end of the day, you're having a conversation, but you do have some goals out of that conversation. You want good content and you want as much information as that person is willing to give you. And the way that you can be sure or give yourself as good a chance as possible of doing that is to prepare. Now, I understand that newsrooms are very fast paced. A story might break and you really have to get someone on it quickly. But if you even just take those 2 or 3 minutes to have a quick Google, see what you can find out about the story already, relevant background information, scribble down a few points. Ideally, if you can put together a kind of a proper brief that outlines 5 or 6 bullet points on the story and a few potential questions. If you have that luxury of time, get that together. The name and the title of the person you're due to interview and the format of the interview as well. So whether it's going to be live, is it in person or in studio? Are you going to meet this person for the interview, or is it a remote interview like over Zoom? That brief will help you then know the topics that you want to cover. Like, for example, if you are interviewing a minister about a particular story of the day, you're still going to want to get them on a couple of other issues, like bringing up other relevant stuff to their department and their brief, and see what you can get out of them on that. So this is why you have your potential questions, but I would treat them as a safety net. They're there if you need them. If the interviewee is not maybe being overly forthcoming, or you're kind of just racking your brains for where to go with it, if they're being a bit difficult, your questions are there and ideally you'll have them in front of you, but you do need to be ready to change. You never go into an interview with thinking, oh, this is your set list of questions and I absolutely have to ask all of these. You need to go with the interviewee where they bring you. And if they bring up something interesting or something that you think, okay, this is going to be really good piece for on air or for a soundbite, go with it. And having that preparation done will give you the confidence to do that because you'll be ready to do it. In terms of the logistics then, always test your equipment as close as possible to the interview. If it's in studio where you're recording into the desk, you have your microphone set up, I would always aim to be in the studio, again, this is obviously not relevant if it's like a mid-morning show that you're working on or whatever and the interviews are part of the show. I'm talking about if you're doing a specific interview for news. Try and be in 5 minutes, get yourself set up in the studio beforehand, test that equipment, make sure the levels are fine. Same applies if you're going to be going out doing vox pops, whatever, if it's your phone you're using or a Zoom recorder, test it as close as possible to the time of recording. Doing it like 2 or 3 days beforehand, you just never know what issue or glitch might arise in that time. Thinking about when and where the audio will be used. So again, if you are purely trying to get someone for a news bulletin and you're telling them, okay, I'm just literally looking to cut clips for news bulletins, they know then keep it short and snappy. You want your 20-second sound bites, whatever it is. But if you're recording an interview in advance that's maybe going to go out on a content show on your station, you're trying to bear that in mind as well. You're thinking, okay, maybe this needs to fill actually about 4 or 5 minutes of radio, which is a long time. But you're bearing that in mind then when you are recording. Adapting your interviewing style. Again, this is the difference between someone who's media trained as an interviewee and is maybe a lot more used to avoiding questions they don't want to answer, or is just used to dealing with the media. And the example I always give is, you know, a local person who unfortunately has been through a tragedy and is maybe using that as a fundraising opportunity now, and they're on to talk to you about their event. You're going to treat the media trained person and the non-media trained person a bit differently. You're probably going to be a little bit more on your guard with the media trained person or the minister or the politician, because you're going to know that they don't necessarily want to answer the questions that you're asking. Whereas if it's someone who's not used to the media environment, you need to draw them out a little bit more. You need to just be that little bit more empathetic and friendly and really draw them out. The note as well of asking interviewees to introduce themselves on the record. So again, if this is a live interview, the presenter will have done this. They'll have told the listener who they're speaking to. But if it's pre-recorded, just always get them to get their name and title so that you get it right, you're pronouncing it right, and it's all correct. And then the basics of the open questions then. So like we talked about in our scripting, the information you need to give is the who, what, where, why, and when. They're the main information. So they should be your guide into the questions that you ask so that you're getting the information that you need. Other options, tell us or explain. They're just a couple examples of how you can start your questions. And where this is really going to be your friend is when you are inevitably sent out doing vox pops to stop people on the street, get the voice of the people who don't want to talk to you, and you need to invite them out. So these open questions will be your friend in vox pops. Don't give them an opportunity to say no. The exception is where you might need to be a bit more specific with your questioning is if you actually need a yes or no answer, or if your interviewee is just really going on and you need to actually focus them a little bit more. In that case, you may say something like, tell us the most important thing that listeners need to know, or tell us the main thing. Really try and focus your questions in that sense. Something that I time and time again fall down on, paying attention during the interview. You're obviously thinking about what's coming next. You're thinking about something that happened earlier in the day. You're making sure you're monitoring your levels and making sure that's all okay. But as much as you can, be in the moment in the interview. Try not to miss something they've said. Make your little notes either with a pen and paper, or if you're recording into Adobe Audition or a similar software, there's usually an option in Adobe Audition. It's the letter M. If you hit that, it'll put a little a visual marker on the audio file, and you can come back to it then when you're editing it and say, okay, they said something interesting here, and you'll have that visual. And again, to be persistent in your questions, just ask again. You mightn't always get the answer, and certainly if it's someone like a politician or a minister, they might just be dodging. But if you ask a couple of times, you've let your listeners know that you didn't just let them off the hook. You did absolutely try and get an answer out of them. As we said, if you've no studio access and you're going to meet someone, I would say the Voice Record Pro app on your phone is still a very good option. It's been around for a good few years now, but it's still quite good. A Zoom recorder, a little bit of an older piece of technology, but I think most radio stations still have them. They're excellent for audio quality. You'll just find the battery life is a bit of an issue in them, but they are very good. In iRadio, for a lot of our out and about social content, we're using Rode mics, Rode wireless mics, and they're just connected via Bluetooth. And then your remote options include the Zoom app, which is what we're obviously doing the course on this evening, and it has the recording option, which is fantastic. The one caveat I'd give is obviously you're not able to monitor your levels. So I would say a backup recording into Audition or Audacity or similar is very helpful. Clean Feed is something that we use for outside broadcasts, but there is a free option that I think will let you do some recording of an interview, and again, better quality. And an absolute last resort, and I would just say WhatsApp voice notes are very much if you just want listener interaction or you want Vox Pop style clips. you're not going to conduct an interview over WhatsApp voice note, like by sending the questions and they just answer, because you'll find they're just kind of reading them like a script. But WhatsApp voice note is kind of a last resort.
I'm going to ask people for questions for a few minutes.
Fionnuala.
Yes.
Ben, go for it.
I work as a voiceover artist, and I'm not very good with long form reading. Generally, I do a lot of adverts, things like that, so I'm comfortable with recording, but it's usually 10 second, 20 second, whatever, and you have an hour session, you have loads of time. So the idea of reading the news bulletin live on radio is actually far more terrifying for me than you might think. But I usually mark up my scripts very thoroughly with lots of short form, shorthand symbols and things that I find very useful. You can't do that in Burley, right? So any tips? What are your thoughts like for someone like me?
So unfortunately, yes, because of literally like the code or the way Burley is built, it's not great on symbols. Like if you try and copy and paste in from a press release, it's not going to recognise, for example, a euro symbol, a quotation mark, something like that. You have to put them in manually yourself. But honestly, with Burley, if you are writing a script for yourself, you have to just make it work for you. So I think any shorthand you've developed or any ways of saying things, like I think I've said this a million times in the course over the years, over the years, I would constantly write Meehall for Micheál Martin, to just be like, he's not Michael, and I know he's not Michael, but you do have to make the script work for you. So I think any shorthand, and like we came back to earlier, the listener can't see what you're reading. So if it is only for your eyes, then that's absolutely fine. It's whatever makes you a more fluent and confident reader. Caveat being, you don't file that to the network. You don't file that for another reader to read. You have to stick to the conventions there. But certainly, I think whatever changes you need to make to suit yourself, you do them.
Brilliant. And if I can follow up for a second.
Yeah.
So actually my perception before doing this course would have been that the people, and now we go over to the news with Fionnuala Corbett, I would have always presumed those people were journalists or had some sort of journalistic qualification or degree or understanding. Now we've done a certain amount, we've covered a certain amount of that on here, but how are there people who work in news on radio? How common is it for people who don't come from a journalistic background to find themselves in those roles?
So not in my experience, not common at all. So certainly not an independent radio. From what I've seen, obviously, and I wouldn't imagine that it's in any way common in RTE either. I think years ago, and we're probably talking decades at this stage, people were hired maybe for their voice to be an announcer. That's certainly not the case anymore. And it's more likely what you'll find, more people than you would expect have a news background and then go on to branch into other aspects of radio. I'm bringing to mind Dermot Whelan. I know he was a reader, I think, on 98 FM before he went into presenting. And I know I'm biased, but genuinely, news is one of the best ways to get your foot in the door, because it is always happening. As we mentioned earlier, every station has a certain news requirement, and unfortunately it's not as easy to find skilled journalists and skilled readers as you might think. So definitely the journalism background is never going to hurt you, because even if you move into presenting, having a news sense is always really important. Like, I'll give the example of Dave, who I present the show with. That man absolutely should be in journalism. He has a nose for a story. He knows a story nearly before it's happened. He's the one telling me, being like, have you heard about this? Having that news sense is so valuable. So no, you definitely, you're going to get found out in radio if there's no news background there at all.
Great. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I'd also add in, like, that news training is really important for the legal side of things, because we do with Sarah Kieran, we do just an hour and a half overview of media law and defamation, and it's enough to scare everybody, but it's not really in depth. Like, you can obviously do 7 years of degrees in this. So journalism students or people who are trained journalists will have a lot more in-depth knowledge of media law, broadcast law, what you can say on air, court reporting, all of that stuff that we don't cover here because you don't need it for an introductory. But if you were to work in news, you would need more training in it, which of course Learning Waves can help you with, but it's a great background to have if you've got a degree or a college course in it. Any other questions?
I have a question, actually.
Hi, Mia.
Kind of on the topic of doing journalism in college. I'm in final year of journalism in DCU. and I find I do so much news writing that when I try and script for radio, I find it really hard to condense my work. Do you have any tips on being like a bit more disciplined in like your scripting?
So again, I would say about like cutting down the words, like rereading over and over and saying, okay, well, does that word absolutely need to be there or can it go? And this is where I think your consumption of news is really going to help. I think the more that you actually listen to radio news, the more natural it's going to come to you to actually script in that way. Because I'm the opposite. Like, I've been working so long now in radio news. If you told me to write an article for online, I'm there, Jesus, how do I pad this out and like make this sentence longer and add in and get quotes or whatever? So it really is, unfortunately, the practice, but just remembering, okay, is this really necessary? I think there's a really cliched example from years ago of like fresh fish for sale here and how they go through that process of like, okay, obviously it's fresh. Obviously it's here because why would you have the sign here? And then they basically cut it down to just say fish for sale or whatever it is. So you're just trying to give that example of bringing the word count down as much as you can. So yeah, I hope that helps, by the way. I know I was basically telling you to just do it,
No,
but it is the case of practicing as much as you can and always just being really harsh on yourself, just being like, yeah, how can I get it as short as possible?
I guess this one's just more a practical question about clips on a bulletin. Are you allowed to just take clips from everywhere, or like I think the examples you gave earlier, a lot of them were interviews with partner stations. Are you
Yes.
allowed to just go online, excuse me, and take a clip without crediting it?
So no, the wire service that's there, we're allowed to use that because, well, now we are part of Barra Media. Before we joined them, we were a client station, so we were paying for that service. So once an interview is filed to the network, yes, it is then fair game for the network to use it. You will see a lot of times the likes of Galway Bay FM especially, and WLR will send stuff up as well. And in that case, it will say, credit WLR, which, you're happy to do. Obviously, though, if you can get your own, that is the main one. In terms of taking audio from online, just to give an example, I would often do it from a celebrity's verified social media. If they put up a video talking about a certain story or making a certain announcement, again, if they've shared that to their own public verified social media, that is fair game. But I'm not going to go on to RTE Radio and hear Claire Byrne chatting to someone and say, yoink, I'm going to take that. That's not okay. Yeah. Now, again, if it's a case of taking, what you would do is credit RTE in that situation and maybe paraphrase what was said and still give the credit. But then it's up to you to follow up on it and try and get your own audio on it. That is the job of the journalist.
Thanks.
Yeah, and it would be in very rare occasions that you would do that if there was something like really massive or one interview only was given or something happened. And it would be the same if there was a big story, in America or something like that. It's very rare that you can't really take like RTE News or BBC reporters or Sky reporters' work and not credit them and just kind of pretend you were there interviewing Donald Trump or whatever. Because yeah, I think it's probably copyright and there's probably lots of laws around it, but it's just something that you wouldn't do. Instagram and verified and different stories, entertainment stories, they're probably more,
Yeah, again, it's with the credit, like you would say, oh, Miley Cyrus posted this on Instagram today.
Yeah.
Because that, I suppose, is with the understanding that it's very much for public consumption, but you are still crediting where it came from. Yeah, you're not like, you wouldn't try and pass it off as, oh, we were chatting to Miley there 10 minutes ago. You're not going to do that. It is coming from where it's coming from.
But particularly when it comes to like sports and trying to get like headlines and stuff for that, is it sometimes hard to try and do? Because I know obviously like Gaelic's always going, and then soccer in the UK, that's like big in Ireland. But in terms of like trying to find stuff kind of after that to kind of pad out, because I know when you're trying to go into the more niche sports, like maybe tennis or maybe like motorsports, I know people love to talk about Alex Dunn in Formula 2 when like they want to when they want to talk about Formula 1. But is it hard when there's kind of not really any Irish in those particular sports? And then, well, what sports would people be interested into kind of after soccer and stuff like that, where there's no kind of Irish representation?
So yeah, where we are very much, I sometimes describe us as bandwagoners, because you're always going to hear the Premier League, GAA, you'll hear golf at the weekend, and you'll hear rugby when the URC is on, or if it's a World Cup or something like that. So we very much stick to that. And then yes, if there is, like, if it's Gary O'Donovan at rowing, we'll throw it in. Fiona Murta, people who've like won medals. We're basically a little bit like glory hunters on that. You're looking to see who's doing well, and you're kind of ignoring the people who aren't. And that's not to sound harsh, but it's just at the end of the day, like we talked about earlier, well, what are your listeners talking about? They're talking about the people who have done well or who have a profile there. I'm not a sports journalist myself, but I know, like, for example, these journalists are monitoring press conferences that managers are giving or players are giving, and they're sourcing stories in the same way of, like, okay, seeing what matches, what fixtures are on. They're analysing how players' form has been, so they can give like information on that. But again, what you're going to hear on a regular sports bulletin are the big main sports. We're not going to be going too niche on it at all. That is for your more specialist sports shows like Off the Ball.